Hey sis! From coast to coast, we're bridging the gap between the cisgender and transgender community, creating meaningful dialogue and space to learn and grow.
Join us as we connect with our community, break down tough conversations, and get comfortable being better humans.
Welcome to Hey Sis. My name is Isaac Cook. I use they, he pronouns, and I am a trans, non-binary social scientist from Atlanta, Canada.
And I'm Sin Sweeney. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a journalist, educator, and a parent of a trans child. And together, we're breaking down the binary and building better humans one conversation at a time. So the Rhodes Scholarship was established through the will of Cecil John Rhodes in 1902. It is fully funded, full-time, postgraduate award, which enables talented young people from around the world to study at the University of Oxford in England. According to the Rhodes Trust, the overall global acceptance rate stands at only about 0.7%, making it one of the most competitive scholarships in the world. And it's worth repeating, the global acceptance rate is 0.7%. It's uber competitive. However, over the years, the Rhodes Scholarship has not been without controversy for excluding Black people, excluding women, and many others. And for its name, commemorating a South African leader who once introduced legislation to push Black residents from their land. But today, we're celebrating. We're going to be talking all about that, but with the current stats surrounding the percentage of trans Canadians almost paralleling that 0.7% rate, imagine the odds of being named the first transgender woman in Canada to be the recipient of this prestigious Rhodes Scholarship. Well, today's guest knows exactly what beating those odds feels like.
Today, Sid and I are joined by Julia Levy, she, her, a recent Rhodes Scholarship recipient. Julia is a recent graduate from the University of Victoria, also known as UVic, located in Western Canada on Vancouver Island with an honors in chemistry and a minor in visual arts. In addition to her lab research at UVic and the University of Bristol, Julia has worked with a nonprofit for gender diverse youth, Gender Generations Project, as a director and trans mentor. She is excited to pursue a master's in theoretical and computational chemistry and education, digital and social change, and hopes to leverage this work to continue to develop educational software that improves learning outcomes for students of all backgrounds. Julia is hoping to be able to take these ideals to Oxford and use the education offered by the Rhodes Scholarship to make positive impacts in the community she is connected with. Welcome to Hey Sis, Julia.
Hey, good to be here.
We're happy to have you. So let's begin perhaps with a Hey Sis foundational question. Where do you currently reside and where do you call home?
Yeah, so I grew up in Vancouver, which is on the Musqueam and Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh nations. But I grew up in Vancouver, and that's where I am right now. But I went to school at the University of Victoria, and so I call, Victoria home. But that's, of course, on the Lekwungen people's lands and the Wasanic people's and the Esquimalt people's lands. I've always been like a BC gal, and that's kind of all I've lived, although technically, I'm living in Berlin right now. I leave tomorrow to fly back there. And then I guess I'll be in the UK for a while.
Yeah.
And then who knows where. I'm sort of in this weird uprooted state right now where, moved out of my place in Victoria and I just actually moved out my childhood bedroom yesterday. And now I'm kind of moving out properly to a new city again.
Oh, it's so exciting. You're like a citizen of the world right now.
That's a romantic way of putting it.
I think when I found you after I'd seen the article and I'm like, oh, we need to talk to Julia. You were in Germany at the time.
Yes.
And some people within the department at U of Vic were really nice to say, we're not connecting you, but we will track her down and see if she wants to talk to you. So that was great. Thank you for getting back to us. And we want to hear all about this Rhodes Scholarship. I just want to back it up to the moment when you first heard. And we're wondering okay, so how did you hear the news? What do they knock on your door? Do they phone your cell? How did that happen?
They do interviews. And then on the same day, they do interviews during the day and everyone gets interviewed. And then they finish the interviews at 4. And then they call you at 5 p.m. with who got it.
Wow.
And so, I was convinced after my interview that I didn't get it. Absolutely convinced. Partially because the other candidates were so incredible. And partially because the questions they were asking me, we thought that maybe the other candidates were more applicable for what the questions they were asking. So I came out convinced I wasn't going to get it. Was watching TV to distract myself. And then I get a call, and I guess the first thing I said was, "You're kidding me," or I did not expect that. So it was a real lovely surprise on that front.
And so it is a process, right? We're going to have to go through this whole process now because I didn't realize it was all so quick and on the same day.
Oh, yeah.
Were you well connected with the other kind of applicants, or what was that?
Yeah, so you apply to the university first, and the university chooses some people to apply on, and those people become finalists. In Canada, there's 6 finalists for every 1 person selected. So, like, there's 2 people in Ontario who get it, for example, so they have 12 finalists. Or 2 in Quebec, so they have 12 finalists. We had 6 because we only have 1 in BC. Then you do, like, a dinner event with everybody where you kind of meet and greet with there's, like, 6 applicants, and then 7 judges, sort of adjudicators, and you do like a meet and greet with them. And so I really got to get to know them. And actually a couple of them, 1 or 2 of them were people that I actually had like known through something else, or there was a bunch of UVic people who, like University of Victoria people who got in, who were extremely strong applicants. And one of them who I actually had known already. So it was nice. And we got to connect beforehand, and like we all like met up and went together into the dinner. So it was really lovely. You do the dinner, and then the next day you do the interviews, and then like by the evening, you know.
That's so fast.
It's a real quick process, yeah.
When did you personally first apply?
I started to apply like in May, but I think I submitted my application in like September.
Okay.
So you submitted
that's
in
still really
September.
fast.
Yeah. And then so when did you find out then exactly? It was November, was it? Or
I found out like in November that I was a finalist. At the time I found out, I was in the UK traveling. So then I came home to do the interview and then like flew out like 4 days after the interview. It's been such a trip. I applied for it, you know, with no intention that I was going to get it. I applied for it just thinking, you know, it'd be a good experience. It'd be a good thing to like get to a finalist, and it'd be, you know, gravy if I got it, but it was not critical. Yeah, I was doing it for the experience. And then, you know, even in the interview and in the dinner, like I felt like I was a good candidate, but I didn't feel like I was that strong. It was a really lovely group of people, and everyone was so incredibly interesting and had done such cool stuff that I was like, these people are going to get it. These people are doing amazing things. It has taken more time to come to terms with the fact that it's happened than it has to actually apply for it and wait for an application to go through.
And it probably really won't hit you until you're actually there and experiencing it.
No, absolutely. I definitely like, I was back in the UK and I got to like go by Oxford for a moment. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, it felt more real then.
Yeah. So, being the first transgender person in Canada,
a woman, there has actually been other transgendered people in Canada who have gotten it. But it's interesting because I think it's an interesting flavor of the ways that media is interested in trans women specifically.
Yeah.
And you know, the old joke that like, you know, talk to cis people about trans people, it's like trans women are the entire monolith of it, and trans men are like, do they even exist? I think it's like kind of indicative of that sort of dynamic, in that there has been, I think, a trans man who's won it, and there's been a non-binary person who identifies as trans who's won it. It was a little less publicized. I think they were pushing it a little bit less themselves, but it's definitely like, when I would talk to the media about it, definitely I was like very clear that I wasn't the first trans person to get it, and I wasn't the first trans person in Canada to get it, but often that got lost in translation a little bit.
Gotcha. And I think that's a really interesting specification to make too, because I know when Sin and I, you know, I was trying to do as much research as I could, because I was like, there's no, like, it's so hard to believe in 2023. You would like to hope that there'd be other trans people getting such an incredible opportunity. And yeah, I don't think I was able to find anything. So that must have been the case, that it was pretty quiet.
I thought the article that I had found, but I'm thinking now, no, it did say first
Canadian trans women, maybe.
Yeah. Which is interesting. I don't think any of the other winners were listed or passed in there. So it's nice to have the perspective. And I'm wondering then, when you heard like from the adjudication and that, did they share with you like what jumped out about like your answers to the questions or about the work they research? No,
I have no idea actually, because, you know, I don't know why they chose me. They called me 45 minutes after the last interview. It could have been, those 45 minutes could have been arguing and throwing fists and fighting over candidates, or it could have been a unanimous thing. I have no idea. I didn't connect with the entire committee as well. Like I connected with a few people really, really well, but, you know, I don't know how the other applicants interviewed. I don't know what they were looking for. It's a pretty arcane process in that way, for sure.
Yeah. And so what did winning mean to you? looking back before the process, like what were you telling yourself aside from, I'm going to do this for fun or I'm going to do this for the experience? Like, what were you thinking in your head, like, what if I do win?
Oh, I think I didn't allow myself to imagine what would happen if I did win. I didn't realize how much it was going to mean to me until I got it. The interview process itself was a really clarifying experience for me around what I would want to do with the Rhodes Scholarship. Because they ask you a lot of questions like, where do you see your research? Where do you see what you're doing? Where do you see the future? Where do you see what you care about? Why does that matter? And it was really having to think about that and actually really put that into words and market myself, I guess is the right way to put it. Made me realize the ways that I do want to engage. I think the significance of this scholarship for me is that, especially, I didn't know that I was going to be the first trans woman in Canada to get it until after I got it. And I was like, wait a second. I was looking at some of the other scholar bios. I'm like, wait, there's actually no other trans people. I assumed there would be. I just hadn't looked. So I was Googled it. And I was like, oh, there's actually only one other trans woman, and she's from the US. It was 2 years ago. And I was like, oh, I'm the first trans woman in Canada to get this. So I didn't know that until after I got it. And all of a sudden it really hit me that I feel a responsibility now to really take this and make something for it for trans communities. And I'm not sure what that looks like in the future. I'm not sure where that fits in. I definitely feel in receiving this scholarship that it has really clarified for me a mission to make something good with it. And I think especially because the Rhodes Scholarship does have a really awful past. I don't think Cecil Rhodes is a particularly good person. It has a racist history. It has a sexist history. It has a colonial history, an extremely colonial history. This scholarship is going to be a lifelong journey of figuring out what do I make with that money that has this sort of history, and how do I make something good out of it, and what does that look like, and can you make something good out of it, and what does that mean to be a visible trans person. A really crazy thing for me was realizing I was the first trans woman in Canada to get this, and then realizing that if I wanted to post about this in my scholar bio about kind of something about me being trans, it would mean now for the rest of my life I could never go stealth. Not that that was a huge priority or anything that I was planning on doing, but I think that when I began to transition, I was imagining, have a fantasy of you move somewhere new and no one knows you're trans, and you can just kind of exist in the world as not a trans person, because I think it can be really hard often to exist as a trans person in the world. It was a real interesting experience of being oh no, this is a commitment to be trans, and that being trans is now a fundamental part of who I am and part of my story in a way that I hadn't always planned for it to be.
You're at a fork in the road, maybe, where you had to decide now, and that choice is kind of gone because it's going to be married to that identity. Is that right?
Exactly.
And you're going to be in the UK and traveling into different countries. Obviously, you feel quite safe in the UK and that, or how do you feel with Oxford and having gone by there and
a land of contrasts, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
The UK, I think overall is terrifying. I mean, just the amount of transphobia that's been coming out of there, specifically in the last couple months, it's really ramped up in the last couple months, especially with this Scottish gender bill stuff and all the culture war bullshit that's coming out of that. On that front, I'm a little nervous, frankly. But I know that the cities themselves, I've been to Manchester, I've been to London, I've been to Glasgow. I was even in rural Scotland, and the people who knew I was trans didn't make a fuss about it, and the people who didn't know I was trans. So it didn't it didn't create issues. But I do think Victoria and Vancouver are very trans friendly, and I think as far as I've talked to people, Oxford seems pretty good, but there are professors there who I'm sure are not going to be super trans friendly, and I'll have to navigate that, I'm sure. Part of getting the scholarship is that there's a kind of the political take of trans people shouldn't have to explain transness to cis people.
Yes,
and I agree, but I think that as a white trans person who has a lot of privilege in a lot of other ways, that message isn't for me. For me, if I don't explain transness and I don't make allies and I don't answer questions and help explain my experiences to people, and things get more transphobic, I have means of escape that will help me to avoid the consequences of a movement towards a more conservative and transphobic political environment. So I've always felt that it's actually my responsibility as a trans person who has a lot of other privileges to be open to answer questions that might be a little probing, and be open to be in rooms with people who are maybe not super trans approving, because I can, and I actually won't face the consequences of my own failure to do that. And I think that has now played triple now with the scholarship, that like, I think that there will be rooms that I'm sitting in where I'm around people who don't agree about my own rights. And I think that part of the responsibility I feel with the scholarship is to be okay to sit in those rooms, even if it's uncomfortable, because I was allowed into the room and not everyone is allowed into that room. And so it's important for me to take advantage of that.
Can I just jump in and clarify on one thing here? Because you said that a lot of people aren't allowed into the room, and that you were allowed into the room. And can I just, with all due respect, say you earn that space in the room, though. You're not just allowed in, you've earned it. And, it's such, congratulations on that.
Thank
and
you.
like you going in there too is, hopefully people will see that you don't have to prove yourself, to be there. You've earned that space, and you have every right to be there alongside everybody else. And I feel like the energy that you bring, like, to this conversation, even in that, like, you're going to rock it. Like, you're just, and coming into it with just such empathetic forethought on how you can give to your community as well is just really incredible.
Thank you.
It's very powerful. And especially, for myself, I'm also a trans person, and there's a lot of internal dialogue, even within the trans community, that we have to have for ourselves, because, like trans masc people do have privilege in, social situations if they are being observed or seen as a man in our societal standards. So it's important, even as trans people, that we reflect, and kind of, as you're saying, like, as like white trans people, like, we have so much privilege, and it's a lot more comfortable for us to sit in a lot of these spaces, especially within academia. Where, Indigenous, Black, people of color historically have not been allowed to even enter that room to begin with. But for you to acknowledge that, I think speaks volumes about your strength and the power that you bring into these spaces, especially as a trans woman, because it just brings those levels, and I greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. I think it's interesting being the first trans woman in Canada to get this, and having all this other privilege. And I do think I've earned this. I've worked my ass off. Absolutely. But the ability for me working my ass off to yield the results that it did came from a lot of other places of privilege. The wealth security that I had as a kid and as a college student, not having to work a second job. There's all these sort of like knock-on effects. So I think it's interesting to have all these other sets of privileges, and then to also be the first trans woman in Canada to have this. I think it's a milestone, and it's great. I'm really looking forward to the milestone when somebody who's really underprivileged in some other way is able to get it as a trans woman, because it's a clear thing that, hey, the trans thing is not a hindrance. It's just another aspect of someone's life, another aspect on their flavor. That's a really exciting thing for me.
Hey Sis is all about connecting communities, and thanks to support from TD Bank Group, here is this episode's Connected Community Moment. So speaking of scholarships, PFLAG Canada is a community partner with the Ted Rogers Scholarship Program, and they offer a scholarship every year. And we wanted to put it out there. It's specifically for LGBTQ2+ graduates that are graduating post-secondary program that year. And you can be eligible to get up to $2,500 yearly for up to 4 years. And that scholarship is open for application now. If you're involved with or want to connect with a PFLAG Canada chapter somewhere across Canada and get involved or have been involved, be sure to submit your name, put it forward, and apply for the scholarship. The deadline for applying is March 22nd. And if you have any questions with that, in my spare time, I happen to be a chapter lead with PFLAG Halifax. You can reach out to me at halifaxns@pflagcanada.ca, and I will point you in the right direction.
This has been a Hey Sis and TD Bank Group Connected Communities moment, because Inclusion matters. I just quickly wanted to cite something that you said in the CBC article because it really stood out to me. You said there's something very powerful about coming into a scholarship that was not intended for you originally. And I love that.
It's kind of funny because you actually have no idea how Cecil would see me. I mean, that scholarship was not intended for women originally. And so I don't know where trans women go in on that. I mean, I think that's one aspect of me trying to figure out what it means to get this, scholarship that I don't feel like I agree with the politics of Cecil Rhodes. There's a lot of power to do something with the money that I don't think would maybe be approved of by Cecil Rhodes. And I think I do want to separate Cecil Rhodes from the Rhodes Foundation now. And they would be the first ones to say that Cecil Rhodes was not a good person. And they do say it. What I'm trying to say is like it feels somewhat subversive to take this money and do something very trans with it and very trans positive with it. But I would be lying if that's not also, I think, one of the things that the foundation is wanting to do with the money too.
Julia, if you can break it down maybe for us, what it's like being a trans chemist and a bit about then your specific focus of study.
The chemistry department at University of Victoria was odd, and there was actually a high number of trans women there. And I don't know if that's like a computer science, sort of like one of those weird fields where you just get like a lot of trans women, or if it just was a fluke. But I think that it was interesting transitioning, because I transitioned about 3.5 years ago. Well, I came out, and I don't know. It's been a long, slow process of transitioning, but like it came out more publicly 3.5 to 3 years ago.
Was that your undergrad then?
Yeah, during my undergrad. I was like during my undergrad. Yeah. At the time, I had already done a lot of I had worked with a lot of professors. I had done a lot of work. I was already kind of known in the chemistry department for doing a lot of stuff. So it was a bit of an interesting experience because I think that I already had a positive reputation within the department before I transitioned. So even if people who may have not understood or approved or whatever, or got it, I think that being successful in a field is a great way for people to not really care what you're doing. I mean, academia is weird in that there's a lot of tolerance for nonconformity in that way. I'm really interested to see how it's going to be when I go to the University of Oxford, where I'm not known already, and I have to kind of reintroduce myself to everybody. And I'm, being at Victoria, I got to be a chemist first, and then I got to come out as trans.
Okay.
But in the future, I'm always going to have to be putting the trans second or first. But it's going to be in the opening salvo of people meeting me.
Your transcripts then and everything, obviously, then you've changed your gender marker and your name. So your transcripts will all transfer over to as Julia Levy. Okay. Yeah.
And so the work I've done with chemistry has been there's 3 kind of genres. One of them is very technical and not, I think, particularly interesting for non-chemists. And it's more just my own passion for organic chemistry and synthesizing weird compounds. That's I've done a lot of work in the lab in that kind of field. But the other two that I think are really interesting and relevant and socially interesting as well is I've done a lot of work in developing software for assisting with the education of chemistry. So chemistry is a very 3D kind of field. You have a 2-dimensional drawing of a molecule, which just kind of sticks in letters and stuff like that. And then you have to imagine that chemical in a 3-dimensional space and imagine it interacting in a 3-dimensional way with other chemicals and things moving and flipping and rotating in this 3-dimensional space. That skill set of being able to visualize those 3-dimensional transformations and interactions is a skill set that I have realized that not everybody has, and that people's performance in chemistry is really determined by whether or not they have the skill set. And so I wanted to develop some software that helped bridge that gap and allowed people to really visualize things in a 3-dimensional sort of space. And that was the stuff that I was initially applying for the Rhodes Scholarship with the intention of really working on. I think having now gotten the Rhodes Scholarship, I really feel like I'm pivoting more towards the other aspects of chemistry that I'm more interested in, which is harm reduction. So I worked as a tech at this drug testing place in Victoria to help combat the opiate crisis that's bad everywhere in Canada, but especially bad in British Columbia right now. That work has been, I think, the most rewarding because I think that chemistry doesn't have the most avenues always for social change and social consciousness. But I think that I found a couple flavors of that, and I really want to continue to work on that. There's a lot of stuff around trans care and harm reduction. Because in the UK, as I'm sure people know, the waiting lines for trans care are really, 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 really long.
Mm-hmm.
And you can go private, but it's expensive. People often have resorted to self-medicating. And there's a real gray market right now for hormones, where you can get hormones that are legal to have, but not legal to import. And you're legally allowed to take them, but you can't legally get them into the country. So people are sort of getting the hormones in and then self-medicating with like injectable hormones mainly.
Which is really dangerous, right? If you don't get the levels right.
It can be dangerous, but it is a situation where the alternatives are worse. I think that like if I was in that same situation, this is exactly what I would be doing.
For a long time, there was a huge testosterone shortage to the degree that I know some trans people who
every September
sharing vials.
Every September it happens because they go on holidays. I think a lot of that production.
Those types of situations where people, assume that you're fine. Like, for instance, I haven't seen a primary healthcare provider in probably 2 years, but I've been calling up being like, hey, can you refill my prescription? Like, there's no stability. I just wanted to quickly go back, Julia, just really quick on the harm reduction side of it. So in your position as a chemist, for instance, there's a lot of like drug testing to make sure that there's no fentanyl or anything that could actually harm users.
I don't know how much you guys know about the opiate crisis and the details of it, but the supply chain shortages that occurred during COVID seriously screwed with the drug supply. Before COVID, when I was working the drug testing, there was, heroin that was sometimes had fentanyl in it, but you could have heroin, and we saw lots of clean samples of heroin. And so you could just test the heroin with a test strip and say, okay, this has fentanyl, it doesn't have fentanyl, it does have fentanyl, it doesn't have fentanyl. After COVID, there is no heroin anymore. There's just fentanyl. The heroin supply is completely impossible to access now. And so it's fentanyl, but fentanyl obviously is a very strong drug. So it's cut with like mainly caffeine, and people are smoking it. But people don't know often how much is in it. So sometimes you'll get like a sample that's 10%, and sometimes it's 20%, and sometimes it's 5%. And that can create a lot of overdoses where people don't know the actual strength of the drugs that they're taking. Right now, drug testing is the most important I think it's ever been in Canada. We've gone from somewhat clean heroin to fentanyl that's not even clean now. That was one of my biggest passions when I was in school, was working with that group. And so how does that interact with it? I just wanted to kind of get that, but how does that interact with trans care? No. There isn't as much fentanyl in the UK right now. Mm-hmm. I suspect that will not always be the case. I suspect that fentanyl will make its way around the world in a much more global way than it currently has. But the way it works with trans care, so right now, the way I see it is trying to find ways to test the substances that people are self-medicating with. The lab results, the figuring out labs for levels and stuff is a totally different section it's much more health oriented. But the actual making sure that drug supply is clean and making sure it is what people think it is something that I have a lot of experience with, and something that I really do want to look forward to doing in the future if possible. There's lots of good groups in the UK doing that kind of work right now, but there hasn't been a lot as far as I can see with coordination between universities in those groups. So I'm hoping to maybe bring that in if those groups want to do that.
Can I ask, and just as we're slowly wrapping up, but you're off to Berlin tomorrow, and then you're going to be in the UK. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm going to be in Berlin for like 6-ish months, 7 months. I'm not sure right now. There's visa complications. It's a whole thing. I was doing that like classic year abroad between undergrad and master's. I was planning on actually doing 2 years abroad before I got the Rhodes Scholarship. So yeah. So I'm cramming in as much travel as I can.
You need to do that. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to have a fabulous time. And I don't know, I can't wait to hear more about all of these ideas that I know are going to formulate at various times and maybe not in the order you think they are, but I really hope that you'll keep in contact with us.
Yeah, I would love to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is there anywhere in particular that listeners, for instance, who want to stay in touch but may not have your email, can kind of stay in touch with you? Do you have like a website, a blog, social media, anything like that?
I don't actually at all. Yeah, there may be a website in the future, but I'm just now realizing that I have to maybe market myself. So it's a new thing on that front. I do have a link. If people want to connect with me, go to my LinkedIn. I just made it like 3 days ago. So
perfect. Yeah. Oh,
there you
great.
go.
All right. Well, we'll put the link in the show notes, and you keep in touch with us too, because we would love to follow up. A year down the road from now, or when suits, and hear how it's all going, and even about your travels and that too. Sounds
amazing.
Great.
Cool. That's great. Thank you so much. It's been such a fun experience.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. Well, safe travels and all the best.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's all the time we have today, folks. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Hey Sis.
The conversation doesn't have to stop here, though. If you would like to get in touch with us to ask us a question or share your story on a future episode, you can email us at connect@simplygoodform.com or visit us on our website at www.heysis.com.